Welcome to The Family Skeptical, Parenting Through Non-Belief.
We are a married atheist couple raising two wonderful, strange children. We ask big questions, dissect weird parenting moments, and examine how society ignores or misrepresents families like ours. If you're any stripe of non-believer who's involved in raising children, welcome. You are our people.
Our kids have heard all our swears, but yours might not have. So be thoughtful if there are young people listening with you. So, Pops, I am pretty excited about the episode this week.
Okay.
And I realized, so to set things up, last episode, we mentioned that we had recorded a whole episode and then thought better of it and realized we needed to do some more setup. And that's what we did in that episode. So this is the topic that we had actually intended for our first topic. And as the only episode that we're going to release in October, I feel like it's very appropriate that it's going to be a Franken episode.
Secularism, good. Sorry, that's a Saturday Night Live reference from 30 years ago. Oh, rest in peace, Phil Hartman. Anyway,
indeed.
Moving right along.
So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the first half of what we originally recorded. And then we're going to hop in with some new thoughts.
I think that sounds fun. We should start that right now.
I agree. But why I said I'm so excited is that as I was thinking about what else I wanted to talk about, I feel like as weird as this episode might end up being when it's all edited together, this was kind of why I wanted to do the podcast in the first place, because I love digging deep into ideas. And so having had a chance to totally record something and then take some time to think about it and all the things that I feel like I didn't get to ask, and then to come back to it and think again, this to me is really fun.
Okay.
So we're going to dive into the first half, and apologies in advance because of the way we did this. There might be a little overlap from what we talked about in the last episode and we talked about in this one. So apologies if that happens, but we're going to dig into teaching logic.
Let's go.
That sounded so insincere. So do you want to cue up what we wanted to talk about? Because I think it's a really interesting topic.
Sure. And it's kind of a bit of a range here because we were talking about this on the aforementioned drive out to see the family. Ideas that we wanted to come up with for upcoming podcast episodes. And the idea came up to do a multi-part series. So this is going to be the first episode in what's going to be several episodes dealing with the process of education. And we're going to start with how, if at all, they're taught how to teach our kids logic, and then also the scientific method as sort of a set of tools that they can use moving forward through their lives to evaluate things that they come into contact with, other beliefs, evidences for other beliefs or claims, coming up with their own hypotheses and being able to explore them. All these sorts of things that a lot of us take for granted, we don't necessarily get from a specific source. We come about them through the course of our lives, and we figure out how this works as we go, or we see one part from, one intellectual source and another part from another intellectual source, be it, a YouTube personality or a professor in college or a family friend who likes to talk about these things, or a book that we read that sparks our interest enough where we research it on our own. But it's not, at least from what I've seen, I know this is anecdotal, this sort of stuff isn't taught to kids in some sort of formal way. And so I thought it would be interesting for us to discuss the ways that we teach logic, the ways that we teach the scientific method, how we make these big concepts digestible for kids, but also, the teaching the importance of them. So I'll kick it over to you, Mom. Which of those do you want it to start off with? Do you want to start off with the scientific method, or do you want to start off with logic stuff?
I think logic stuff is kind of the best place to start, because to me, it's the basis of everything.
Okay. I think just the tip of the iceberg here, but a really, really crucial part is why. See, for a lot of parents, they hear the word why, and they immediately think, as a lot of parents do, the kid constantly asking why. This happens. Why? Because of this. Why? Because of this, right? That sort of infinite regress of whys. That's the butt of jokes for, ages gone by. But the why I'm talking about is more of the Socratic why that we as parents would ask the kids. This is something I've been doing for a while, but in thinking about this podcast episode, I found myself reflecting on it a little bit more. And maybe I don't do it enough with our 8-year-old reader and our 6-year-old Go. And so I want to do it more. But the idea being that whenever a kid expresses an opinion, whenever they state an answer to a question, you don't have to do it all the time, but sometimes push back a little bit and say why. What you're going to do in a really informal way through that really simple question is you're going to force them to justify what they're saying, not take it for granted. So what do you think about that, moms?
Well, I was just thinking it has nothing to do with this, but do you remember with Reader, there was a period when he was heading into the why phase where he didn't, for whatever reason, he would ask what instead, but he actually meant why.
Oh, I vaguely remember that.
It was so weird, and I could not figure out what was happening, because I was like, what do you mean what? You understand what this thing is, but
maybe he was listening to a lot of Little John.
But then I realized it was I don't know what was going on, but his brain had just not connected the right word to the thing. And what he was actually asking was why. And I was like, oh, now we're into this. It was so strange.
And it's such one of those big, watershed cognitive phases for a kid, right? Where they learn enough about language where they can start to manipulate it to gain the understanding that they feel is sufficient.
Yeah. I don't know if I do this at all with the kids. I think what I've definitely gotten into more, because they ask so many questions, right?
Oh my gosh, it's mind-numbing. Yes.
I mean, actually Go has switched a little bit, because there was a period when I was putting Go to sleep so I sing to him while I'm putting him to sleep, but he just talks straight through all the songs. So it would be so, I can't imagine what it sounds like from the outside. It's very strange. But there was a period where he would that entire time was just spent asking questions. And that has shifted a little bit, where now he's more sort of talking about his own ideas. But I do think a lot of times I definitely do try to turn those questions back onto them. If I think it's something they can figure out or, have knowledge to work through on their own.
Right.
So in that kind of barrage of questions, sometimes I'll say, well, what, can you sort this out? What do you think?
Or sometimes even where did you hear that from? And then he tells you, and then you say, okay, why do you think that person told you this? Or why do you think that person believes this is true. Like you can keep going even if it's something they've heard, but they then believe because they're conditioned to believe what such and such person says to be true.
So it's interesting because when we started talking about logic, I told you that I feel like I have no education in logic, but my parents definitely did. I don't know if they were asking me why a lot of the time, but like as an only child who was incredibly precocious and was very close with her parents, like I just had a lot of deep, interesting conversations with my parents. So I think we addressed, I was definitely learning from those conversations kind of how to think about things, if that makes any sense. Just hearing how like a super smart and interesting person thinks about things.
Do you mean like syllogistically, like coming up with premises and then seeing a conclusion due to the premises sort of thing? Or are you talking about just how to frame a thought?
I think more just how to frame a thought.
Okay.
Like, I feel like any knowledge of logic that I have is like the equivalent of most of my vocabulary, which is picked up from just doing a ton of reading. So I would say...
There are worse ways.
Oh, yeah. No, I think it's really good. But like, then you get asked what a word means. And you have to think, I've been using this my whole life. And I 100% know how to use it. And I can't explain it to another person because I've never like learned or thought about the definition. Half the time the kids ask me about a word, half the time I look it up because I'm like, I don't know. I use that all the time, but I don't know what this, I don't know what like the definition of it is. And so I feel like for logic, I've had interesting conversations with people and had my own logic challenged where I've had to justify it.
Right.
But I couldn't it's only more recently hearing you talk about things and hearing people who have studied it more formally, where I can see how that ties back to like formal concepts of logic. But until last year, I don't think I even thought of it as a thing that would have formal premises.
Yeah, the really interesting part of this is that I am just like basically one step removed from you when it comes to this process. I didn't study logic in school. I had like a couple of philosophy classes when I was in college, but nothing that I would consider to be particularly rigorous, just like 101 level stuff. All of which I forgot. And then I everything that I would say I can use conversationally now I've learned within the last 2 years, just from hearing people talk or debate and realizing, okay, that's what this is. Let me look that up. And so, just doing a lot of digging on my own. But, for instance, I got like the traditional 3 laws of logic down pretty well, but I've just started to dive into propositional calculus, which sounds as mind-numbing as it reads.
So for everybody listening who is like me, when we talk about logic, what are we talking about?
That's a great way to start, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how would you define logic?
I truly don't know. You got to answer this one.
Okay, fine. Okay, so logic talks about when you reason or assess based on how something is valid. Here, let me just read it up. I'll just read a basic definition. Oh, there you go. Reasoning conducted or assessed according to strict principles of validity. The second one is probably, you think about with computers, but it sort of deals with like the flow of ideas leading to a conclusion that actually does something coherent, right? Which you think about in computer language. If everything isn't laid out properly then you're going to have an error and then you have to go and debug it, right? Well, you do the same thing when it comes to logic, especially with syllogisms, because you can have a syllogism that's internally valid, but if the premises don't comport with reality, then it can't be sound. It can be valid, but not sound, you know? So the second definition would be a system or set of principles underlying the arrangements or elements in a computer or electronic device so as to perform a specified task. So you want to have everything laid out where the conclusion comports with reality, or where the conclusion produces an internally coherent result, right? Like that's my usage of it. And that's the usage that I get, like you're talking about conversationally or reading in context, that I've heard other people talk about with it. It's like, how does this comport with reality? And so that's where like the laws of logic are really good to teach to kids, because they're not complicated. You know, they're things that a young mind can look at and say, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then you can ask, can you think of this being any other way? And I mean, unless they're going to be like a budding Leibniz, then they're probably not going to have, they're probably not going to have anything other than what you just spouted off to them, right? And so the three traditional laws.
Okay, and let me see. Wait.
Yes,
where,
please.
So
yes.
Where did the laws come from?
So the laws of thought are I think, because again, this is a sort of thing that I still have to like look up to remember, but I think this is like 19th century stuff where I think I seem to remember this is 19th century, but they're based on what on what came before, right? Like all philosophy, it's, built on the backs of Plato and Aristotle and all those dudes. So you have three laws, these are coined by, I believe it was Bertrand Russell. And so this would have come out of the 19th century, and he would have been writing about this in like the very early 20th century. Okay. And so there are three that would be identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle. And that's a lot of big language that you can break down real easy. Law of identity is X is X. Like whatever is how it's presented idiomatically, right? But if you look at it from like a mathematical standpoint, math being another great way of teaching logic, X equals X, right? Yeah. An apple is an apple. A cat is a cat. I am me, right? Maybe that last one gets a little murky, but a thing is a thing. A thing is itself. Okay. Then non-contradiction is nothing. Let me read what he said. I believe what he said was nothing can both be and not be. So like X can't equal not X. You know what I mean? So like not even X can't be Y, because if Y has the same, consists of the same set as X, then it could be, I guess, like X can be Y, right? 3 can equal 3 if both X and Y equal 3. This is more like something cannot both be and not be. So it can't contradict itself, right? Which comes down to one of the, like some of the things that we see as flaws in certain theologies, right? And then there's the law of excluded middle, which you can't, like there are certain extremes when it comes to existence. Like it either is or it isn't. He said everything must either be or not be. And so let me read from the wiki really quick, find this. In accordance with the law of excluded middle or excluded third, for every proposition, either its positive or negative form is true. So one of them is true, but they can't both be true. And so you could say it's sunny or it's cloudy. You could say, sure, it's partially cloudy, but that would be a form of cloudy, right? Or you could say it's night or it's day. It can't be both. It's either night or it's day. Even if it's in transition, you could say, oh, is it now it's ticked over? Now, is it night or is it day? Or you could say it's red or it's green. Doesn't matter if you're colorblind or not. You can look at from a removed perspective and you can say based on light wavelength, what is it? It can't be both.
So I'm curious, did you learn anything about formal logic before college?
No, not at all. Not even a little bit, not even a tidbit, not one jot or tittle.
Okay, same. And I didn't learn about it in college either because, as you like to say, I made sure to have an incredibly narrow, unhelpful college education.
I never said that. I just disparaged the college you went to.
Well, all of your disparagement more comes down to my choices and the courses I took. But
I know you went to a very reputable institution who has actually produced a fair number of notable philosophers.
Yeah, and I chose to only study film studies, which was interesting. But anyways, do you think that formal logic should be taught in grade school?
I mean, like I said, you can, like you talking about this from the top level, which would be a kid says something they think is true. You ask them why and force them to justify themselves. Whenever a kid learns about counting and basic addition, if you can engage with them on those two basic fundamental, like questioning and mathematic levels, you have two massive utilities that you can bring to bear to start talking about logic. It doesn't have to even wait until grade school. You can do this with, 4-year-old, hell, even a 3-year-old who has the language to actually start to chew these things through with you. So yeah, I definitely think you should be able to do this at grade school. I think that you can start, teaching these things at a kindergarten level, and some educational philosophies already do, right? Like
ones?
certain methods. I guess I just spoke out of hand, but I get the sense that certain methods encourage kids to question the things that they come up with as solutions to problems or puzzles, right? Why did I come up with this? What supports this answer that I've come up with? Right? Like, isn't that part of the
yeah? Well, so this
like
is
Montessori or Waldorf or one of those, right? I'm not out of my mind, right? Like there are early childhood educational methods that actually have ingrained the concept of questioning the answer that you give to make sure that the answer that you give is supported, even if you have really rudimentary language surrounding it.
I don't.
All right, I'm going to look that up. I could totally retract this next
fully,
time and say I am totally full of,
I think,
poo-poo, and that I spoke out of turn when it came, or spoke out of hand when it came to this. So
I think it is interesting how few forms of education focus on how to formulate a thought. So asking why it's great, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I actually think we're talking about two slightly different things.
Yeah.
Because you can ask a kid why. And what I think is so interesting from what I've learned about the laws of logic,
right,
is that once you learn them, they're pretty self-evident.
Yeah.
But it is also very easy not to get there on your own. And the common foibles in the laws of logic that people make are also just like incredibly easy to do. So you can ask kids why till you're blue in the face, right? And that'll be amazing. And it'll make them think about all sorts of interesting things and come up with all sorts of crazy ideas. But if you ask kids why, they're not necessarily going to get to that level of self-checking.
Which is why it's also good to encourage them to be okay with saying, I don't know. Like the point isn't to necessarily always have an answer. The point is to drill down to make sure that that your answer is based on something that you can actually show somebody else and have them come to the same conclusion, right?
But this is what I've found so interesting about asking kids why. Mm-hmm. I actually think the human inclination, and you were like this because your mom, remember that?
Oh, you make up your own answer. You make up your own answers.
I think
right.
The human response that kids show is actually to make up your own answer. Which
Go. Oh my gosh, is Go so good at this? He takes after me so much. You'll ask him a question and you'll be like, yeah, that's a great answer. That is completely not true though. That's really entertaining.
No, but he stands by it. And what was the award you got that you were
most likely to have an answer?
Yes, very specifically not specified the correct answer.
Yeah, and you know what? Thankfully, I acknowledge that inclination, and I have taken steps to rectify it.
Yeah, but I actually think like that is the more common inclination for kids to have.
But that gets to the next point, which is fallacies. And so, with Reader and Go, I've taught them about one fallacy so far.
Which one have you taught them about?
Incredulity. Because it's very easy for a child to understand. You know something or you don't know it. And if you don't know a thing, it's very hard to come up with an answer about the thing or to have sufficient knowledge to describe said thing, right? So we talk about it often when it comes to, God claims. The argument from incredulity is basically you can see it in the God of the gaps, like all over the place, right? Like I don't understand this thing, therefore X, Y, and Z, God did it, right? And it's been happening time immemorial from paganism all on up to today. But it is very easy to do, to like your version of events and how your emotion or your ego is already wrapped up in a solution that you've come up with, rather than to look at it and say, I actually don't know if this is true or not. I'm now invested in finding out whether that's the case and then maybe amending my position. And to which I could potentially say, I don't know, instead of having any answer, right?
Okay. And we're back to the present day. Time leap over. So after listening to what we originally recorded, it really made me realize how little I know about this topic. And so I did a mini deep dive kind of down the YouTube hole into videos about logic. It made me realize how much more I'd like to learn about this.
Cool.
But one of the things I started looking up, because I just didn't know if there would be anything out there, was 4 videos about teaching logic to kids.
Fabulous.
And I didn't find a ton. And that could have been that, I did not have that much time to do the search. There wasn't a ton. Most of it seemed not to be focused on real young kids.
Right.
But there were a couple things for older kids, which I found interesting. One of those things was a game about syllogisms. And when we originally recorded, we talked about syllogisms, which I feel like is it's like kind of one of the simpler pieces of formal logic that I think is the easiest to understand.
Well, aside from what we talked about in the first episode, introducing logic as a sort of a mode of thinking or a tool, using math and using, why questions, forcing a child to justify a conclusion. Those are great ways to start, if we're going to just backtrack a tiny bit, to start young children thinking logically, validating the things that they think are true, and being able to, quote unquote, show their work like your math teacher would always ask you to do. But yeah, moving forward to older children, really excited to hear what you learned from the videos, moms.
And so to start, do you want to explain what a syllogism is?
How about you do it?
Okay. I spoke in the last episode about how bad I am at definitions, but
okay.
I can give an example of what a syllogism is.
Okay, let's start with that.
Okay. I would say it's sort of a progression that uses ideas from logic. So the one they gave in the example, which I think is actually really interesting because it doesn't work. But
okay.
the one they gave in the example is all dogs have 4 legs.
Right.
Rover is a dog. Therefore, Rover has 4 legs.
Yeah, the even more classic one is like dogs are animals. Animals have 4 legs. All dogs have 4 legs, right? Yeah. Right. So basically, a syllogism is when you have when you come to a conclusion that you draw from 2 propositions, whether they're assumed or whether they're given, and those are called the premises, right? Mm-hmm. And each of those premises has to share a term with the conclusion, and it has this sort of like common area that's not present in the conclusion. And so it's a form of deducing things. But that's why not all syllogisms are necessarily valid, because the premises could be just wackadoo, right?
Oh,
like you could have a conclusion that where the syllogism is sound, like you get from here to here to here to the end, and the path makes sense, even though the waypoints along the way don't necessarily comport with reality. And that's the real kicker, is that having a valid and sound, like a properly sound syllogism, or that also being valid, is not always necessarily as easy as just saying, oh, this is what I believe and here's my syllogism supporting it, or whatever.
And I think it's a fun game because syllogisms are fun because, like you said, they can break down on 2 accounts. Like either the actual logic within them can be wrong, mm-hmm. or the premises can be wrong. So the logic works, but the premises are wrong, and therefore you still get a bad conclusion.
See Kalam cosmological argument for an illustration of this. But I'm sorry.
And
I'll shut up now.
So as an example of that, you could say all dogs are purple. Rover is a dog, therefore Rover is purple. Like that logic works, mm-hmm. but clearly all dogs are not purple. So
right.
The premise is wrong. Yeah. And then an example of the logic not working would be, what was the example they used?
Well, you could have a conclusion that doesn't follow from the premises, right?
Oh, yeah. That's another. Yeah, exactly.
So you could do like all dogs are animals. All animals have 4 legs. Therefore, all dogs can run really fast.
Yeah, there's that. But there's also like a bad premise in a different way. Well, if I come up with it, I'll come back and record.
You mean moms, if you come up with it, you're going to splice in some sort of
another Franken bit.
Why stop now? I think you should keep editing this until next Halloween.
I like that idea. But so the game is, however many kids you have, you mm-hmm. write out little slips of paper, and on one of them it says true, and the rest it says false, and mm-hmm. you mix them up in a hat, and everybody takes one. And then all the kids who have false have to make a syllogism that sounds true, but actually mm-hmm. isn't for some reason.
Interesting.
And the kid who has true has to make a syllogism that's true, but sounds mm-hmm. false. And then everybody reads theirs and people vote on whether it's true and false. And you get points based on how many people you can trick.
That's interesting. Okay.
I think it's a really pretty interesting idea for a game.
Like, yeah, that's like, cool high school teacher busts this out in the first day of class, is like, oh, check out, look how hip I can be. We're going to play a game. That's fun.
I love that you said that, because that takes me immediately to the other thing I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
So,
hey, look at me go.
As soon as you get into these things, like as soon as you go down the rabbit hole of YouTube, the other thing that pops up is logical fallacies.
Yeah.
So when people try to use these logical arguments, the kind of fallacies that they come up with. And I think what's so interesting about the logical fallacies is how easy they are to fall into.
Oh, yes.
As I was watching the videos, I actually, like, we have to do a whole other episode about logical fallacies.
It's fine.
Because there are a couple that I think, like, I just don't, I understand why they are logical fallacies, but like, I truly don't understand how you avoid them.
You know what? One of my favorites that I encounter a lot with some apologists or like apologist minions is the fallacy.
What's the fallacy?
That's when you fall back on saying, all things that contradict your position are fallacious necessarily. So it's basically like a trap of being afraid to confront your own position or validate your own position, as opposed to pointing that and now in some cases, some statements about positions could be fallacious, but the position themselves isn't necessarily fallacious. So that could be up to the person making the statement sort of ham-handedly, but the position itself, it could be totally sound, right? And totally valid and sound. But saying, oh no, there's just a fallacy, so I don't have to address any of it, I'm going to dismiss the whole thing, isn't necessarily a good mode of discourse either. So however you slice it, there is also a trap of getting into a habit of saying, oh, that's a fallacy, I can dismiss that. Oh, that's a fallacy, I don't have to address that. When life tends to be more complicated than that.
Yeah, I think one of the ones that I think is just so hard to avoid is I don't know what the official name is, but it's like an appeal to a personal story or appeal to personal experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Appeal to anecdotal evidence.
Right.
Which you see a lot. Like, there are a lot more homeless people in my neighborhood. Therefore, the city is having a huge increase in homelessness. It's very easy to feel that way. That doesn't mean
rising crime rates is another thing. Like statistically speaking, violent crime has been declining for years, and yet Chicago. Oh my gosh, have you seen Chicago? Like it's silly. But appeals to authority also.
That's the other one I want to talk about. That's the other one I want to talk about.
Yes, appeals to authority is a big one, and doesn't matter like where you land politically or religiously. Like there are plenty of authority figures that you can lean on to justify your position. And so it's important, especially when you're talking about your position and you're talking about like the work that a specific person who might also be considered an authority figure has done in support of your position, that you don't say, oh, I think it's true because this person said it. No, you say, I think it's true because this is the conclusion that was reached, that we can, verify independently, thus, yada, yada, yada.
So, watching a few of those as well, everybody falls into these, right? And if you're particularly good, you're like better at catching yourself, but everybody does.
That's the big thing that I want to teach my kids through all of this, is that it's that you're going to make these fallacies. You're like, it's just human nature. But the real skill, the real superpower is to be able to say, oh, wait, did I just say that? Let me check that. Or to have the humility to have somebody say, no, I don't think that's what you mean when you say that. Or I think that's fallacious. And just to say very critically, turn the lens back on yourself and say like, okay, is this person right? Did I actually commit this fallacy? And it seems kind of like nerdy. And I guess it is in a sense, but I mean, don't you want
super nerdy.
But don't you want the things you believe to be true? Don't you want the things you share with other people to be true? Don't you want to help build a society wherein more things that we talk about, share with each other are true as a group? Like I think that's a yes. I'll bite the nerd bullet here because ultimately, like it yields results.
Okay, but here's the thing. So you brought up like the cool high school teacher, right?
Right. Yep.
So I was watching these videos and thinking about
Was there a cool high school teacher?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no. So here's the thing. So I'm watching these videos and I'm thinking about like trying to teach this. Mm-hmm. And clearly you can't, like, logic isn't that hard to teach, right? Mm-hmm. So like this could be taught.
Right.
For sure. And then I was thinking about all the teachers I had. And I went to probably one of the best public high schools in my state. It was like, it was considered top notch, you know. I can think of maybe 2 teachers in my entire pre-college career who I would trust to teach this.
Interesting.
Because I think even the teachers that were considered like the best teachers at the school were the ones least likely to admit they were wrong.
Interesting.
And as much as I would love to see this explored more with kids, I think a lot of teachers have a really hard time admitting that they're wrong. And what I see happening is just teachers like accidentally spreading whatever their own fallacies are to like a huge group of kids. Can I give an anecdote?
Please. Oh, please do.
So what really made me think about this. So senior year of high school, I think it was called the AP composition. You had to write like 6 essays on one topic.
Oh, that's cool.
And everybody chooses a different topic. And the teacher teaching this are the like writing, literature, whatever program at my school was considered really great. I did not agree. I think I actually missed the one great teacher in the department because I got so pissed with it. I took a semester off and did a class with my mom. And I think I missed the one good teacher I would have had doing it. It was an amazing experience, but like, I think I missed the one good teacher. But anyways, people raved about them. I think there were tons of issues, but the guy who taught this class was considered like a super good teacher, right?
Okay.
And everybody has to choose their topic for all their essays. And mine was complete bullshit. I wrote about Lolita and how the movie was re-edited and kind of is like a free speech issue.
Okay.
I don't think it actually was. I think my entire premise was bunk. Like, I think I heard it was and never double checked it. And in the end, I was like, oh shit, I think I'm wrong. But I'd already like gone down the rabbit hole and basically wrote 6 essays on a non-topic.
So that's what we call a sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah. Okay. So that was fine. No problem with that topic. Good to go. Another really interesting guy in my class wanted to write about disarming the police.
Oh, right. This story.
Yeah. So this is before Black Lives Matter. You know, I'm ancient. So this was a long time ago. And so it would be even more horrific today what happened. But the teacher told him, no, you can't write about that. There's no way to make that argument. And, you know, even given like being years and years before this being even more clearly something good to argue for, I was like, what are, you know, in my head, I'm like, what are you talking about? There are countries in the world who are not as armed as our own.
Yep.
Of course you can make that argument. What do you mean you can't? Like, you can disagree with that argument, but it's impossible to make that argument? Like, absolutely not. Of course you can argue for that. But he wasn't allowed to write about it.
Messed up.
So I think about that kind of teacher than going and teaching logic,
Mm,
you know?
yeah.
And I don't know if it can be done.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we said at the outset that one of the challenges in teaching logic is that it's just not being done, right?
Yeah.
And that looking at it as this person should, this person shouldn't be teaching is kind of the starting point to the conversation if we're talking about like high school students, for instance. I would trust grade school teachers because they have to kind of do everything already. And so, like if they teach the sciences well already, then I think that you can trust them with logic to a certain degree.
That is super fascinating.
Like maybe what you do is you say, okay, so anybody in the math department or the science department who wants to teach, who wants to get paid extra or whatever to teach a course on logic to these grades or this grade or whatever. It's a pilot program, sign up here. Like I could see that working. But yeah, if it's like something that's more subjective, that's more prone to interpretation, like I don't know if that type of teacher coming from where they're coming from is necessarily the better option. I think you should start with what the teacher's specialty is and say, like, how much does it already rely on review and logic and testing, right? Showing your work, validating your conclusions. And I can't think of anything better than the sciences and the math programs. I don't care how good the English teacher is. I don't think, like, I had a great English department at my high school.
Yeah.
Great English department. No notes. But I wouldn't ask them to. Like, I would love for the physics teacher I loved that we had in my high school. I would have loved to have seen him do a class on logic, because it would have been acerbic. It would have been hilarious.
Physics teachers are the best.
And he would have called everybody on their bullshit straight to their faces and been totally dismissive. And I would have loved every minute of it. I'm just going to throw that out there, that it might just be my personal experience speaking, but it seems that you should start with the people that are predisposed to already use these logical processes in service of not just the teaching process, but the curriculum that they teach.
And I agree. And probably the English teacher was a bad example, but I was more trying.
It matters, because that person might be the person who signs up and is most vocal about the need for it, because they have like some backstory that you don't know about, and they feel like they should be the person to do it because they're whatever, like ego can get into it. So,
yeah, but I think it's rough, because I think you're going to find those kind of, look, there are teachers out there who, like science teachers, who want to teach creationism side by side with evolution. So,
right. Well, we used to ride dinosaurs. We had they found fossilized saddles. So, come on.
I just think it's going to get tricky. But I like your idea of teaching it young, because that
we already kind of do. That's my point, is that we already kind of do. Like, or at least good teachers do. Why do you think that? Oh, really? That's cool. Why do you think that happened? Oh, that's cool. Why do you think that happened in support of this other thing? Reader's getting old.
I know.
What grade is he in now? Reader's in 4th grade?
Yeah.
Blows my mind. So Reader's in 4th grade. And that's an age that I think that you could actually really start teaching big picture logic and ethics stuff too. Like that, you absolutely can. Having kids go do the train track switching morality exercises. You could talk about that sort of stuff with them in sort of these broad strokes and just get their minds thinking or keep their minds thinking about these things.
Yeah.
Right.
And
It
I
doesn't
still
have to
just
be
come
for a
back to
grade or
like a
something.
great teacher is going to make that experience wonderful, and a bad teacher that is going to be
It's going to traumatize the
worst
children.
pile of bullshit. Like
Mrs.
ever.
Sullivan said that I was a bad person because I would switch the train track over and back.
I swear to God, that would happen though. Like
Yeah,
in a
I
certain
know.
percentage
Lawsuits
of
impending.
classrooms, that would happen. So I don't know. I still don't see a way.
It's fraught. It's fraught.
But I don't want to give up on it. I feel like there's a way. I'm just not seeing it. Can I ask you one more question?
My love, you can ask as many as you'd like.
So what I think is interesting about formal logic, sort of aside from being taught maybe not aside from being taught in schools.
Mm-hmm.
Because like I said, a lot of where I heard it is on some of these atheist chat shows where people call in and try to prove their religion correct and that kind of thing, which is obviously like one small subset of all of this.
Right.
But I do have some sense that, in the political divide, like we said in the last episode, I think there are tons of parents who would be like, lose their shit if this was ever taught. But the actual theory of formal logic, I feel like that is a little bit neutral, where like both sides feel comfortable trying to use it to make their arguments. Like everybody disagrees on the interpretation of it, right?
Right.
So one side thinks the other people are using logic wrong, and the other side thinks,
right.
It's not like everybody's coming to the same conclusions. But I feel like the actual use of logic, I haven't really heard that attacked by either side.
Right.
Like I don't hear people saying, oh, these rules of logic are liberal bullshit.
Right.
Is that accurate? Or is that just who I've listened to, which is a very small subset?
Wait, say the last half of that again. I'm sorry.
Like the actual concept of formal logic, I don't hear people saying that that's bullshit. Like I don't hear conservatives, like when these formal ideas of logic come up, I typically don't hear people who are more conservative be like, oh, that's liberal bullshit, that logic theory. Like I feel like the actual theory is kind of neutral.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And what they'll do is they'll claim, of course, that everything they think is logical. That's why teaching fallacies and identifying them, qualifying them, that's very important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that makes it interesting to me because there are not many things that have that kind of neutrality when it comes to argument.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it, for sure.
So anyways, the one thing I've taken from all of this is that I told you in the earlier recording, I don't feel like I've addressed any of this with Reader and Go. And it has definitely made me more interested in learning more and trying to just do more in our conversations. So like that's been a fun takeaway from everything.
Good.
So I think that wraps it up. Well, it doesn't wrap anything up for this topic, but like I think that's where we're going to end.
That's it. I mean, we could keep going is the point.
Well, and I think we will, because I definitely want to talk about those fallacies, and I'm sure that'll lead to other things too. But in the next episode, we're going to talk about something that actually is taught in schools.
Right.
And we're going to talk about evolution. So
that sounds great.
I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, and there, I don't know if everybody here has seen his YouTube channel, but there's a young British gentleman who is in graduate school at university at this point, I believe. I've been following him for a while. His name is Alex O'Connor. He goes by Cosmic Skeptic, all one word, on YouTube. And if you're interested in the switching the railroad tracks thing, over in the UK, they call it the trolley problem, TROLLY. And he goes through a bunch of different versions of the switching of the railroad tracks morality quandary that I have never seen before. And he goes through them one at a time. And whether or not you or I agree with his conclusions, there are just some really interesting ones that I had never seen posited. So if you guys are interested in doing a slightly deeper dive, moms included, of course, the video is called Trolley Problem Memes, and then parentheses, but taking them seriously. So it's like 20 minutes long, but it really is worth it. It's very interesting.
Awesome.
Yep.
And as always, we have to thank First Frame Music and Jonathan Zalban for the music for this show.
And so that wraps up this episode of The Family Skeptical, where nothing is sacred except for our kids.